Welcome back. Hope you're having a great week and having a great week in the Word. This is really, I really enjoy the book of Romans immensely. Hope you are too. We're continuing in this discussion about how our salvation works itself out, right? Works itself out in the church and outside the church. And in chapter 13, we've been discussing, or Paul's been discussing, salvation and how it works outside the church. We talked about civil government last time in verses 1 through 8 of chapter 13. This time in verses 8 through 14, we'll be talking about with regard to society at large. Society, people we run into. Paul says neighbors. So let's move over to see what Romans says. You know, Paul finished in the last section in verse 7 and 8. He said, "Pay to all that is due them, and then owe nothing to anyone except to love one another." So he's got this discharging a debt, I guess, in his mind here, and that's what we see in verses 8 through 10. We have this constant, perpetual debt that we need to be discharging to others, which is love. Love one another. And he says again in verse 8, to love one another, and the one who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. So what Paul's talking about here is love is how we interact with people around us. It's what distinguishes us. Jesus told us that in John 13, 34 and 35, they will know that you are my disciples by your love. So love for God and love for others is how we fulfill the law. Jesus said these are the highest and greatest commandments, and reminds us again, we have this perpetual debt to pay. Paul says his neighbor in verse 8 there, what the Greek text says literally is heteros, to others. If you have a Bible like mine, you have a little note there. You can see it, number 1. That note points to a note in the margin that says alternative translation, and that alternative translation is literally the other. So people that are different from us, non-Christians. So he quotes the Old Testament then here. He's quoting Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. Again, when Paul does this, he's making the point that this is not something new. It takes on perhaps a new dimension in the light of the salvation that we have now, that we're no longer under the law, but we are guided by the law. We see that here. But he's quoting these things to back up the claim that this is from God. And he says again, as he said at the end of verse 8, love is the fulfillment of the law. Fulfillment in the sense, we get confused on this, not that the law is filled up, not so much that the law has been satisfied, that the law is kept, but that the law was pointing to this. The law was pointing ahead, anticipating this, that the law was guiding Israel as a schoolmaster toward love. Is what he's saying here when he's quoting the Old Testament law in this way. We look at the application of this then, after he's given us this principle here that our salvation is worked out by treating others around us with love. What does love mean? What does love mean? Well, he answers that question in verse 10. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. So love does something. It's not just a feeling, right? It's not just a attitude that you have in your heart or your mind. One pastor that I largely admire once said that we judge ourselves by what we say, and others by what they do. I'd say we judge ourselves by what we say or mean to do, and others by what they actually do. So we see here that love does something. Love does something actually negative. Love does no wrong. That's what he's saying here. We don't wrong our neighbors. That's an expression of our love. We could go even further and say that perhaps in love, we look for the good of our neighbors. We look out for what's good for them. We look out for helping them, opportunities to help them. I live in Colorado, and I'm not bragging about myself, don't get me wrong, but I have nothing to brag about, really, believe me. Ask my wife. But we live in Colorado and lived in the mountains until recently, and we could get snowfall. And we had a lady across the street from us by herself in her 80s. And when it snowed, I made it a point to go and not only clean off my driveway and sidewalk and that, but also to go and do hers as well. So you're looking for opportunities to do good for people. Maybe that's what Paul has in mind here when he gets into the application. Verse 11, we see a sense of urgency here. We haven't seen this yet as Paul's talking about what we need to do. But he says in verse 11, salvation is nearer to us than when we first believed. I think what Paul's talking about here is the return of Jesus. The rapture of the church could happen at any moment. It draws nearer at every breath we take, every tick of the clock. The salvation, the return of Jesus is drawing near. So Paul says, it's time for us to awaken. Wake up. The night is almost gone. The day is near. We need to rid ourselves of deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. In other words, in verse 13, act right, behave properly. Don't do things that you're going to be ashamed of. We can put it simply as that. Put on, in the sense of taking on, he says in verse 14, put on the Lord Jesus Christ, in the sense of taking on his characteristics, his virtues, his purposes, not our own, not the flesh, but what Jesus wants us to do. So the application of this is really, I think, straightforward. If I've got the verse's meaning right, the significance, the meaning, the application is pretty straightforward. Loving those around us means to always aim to do right by them, to be in a hurry, to put Christ on display, to looking for opportunities while there is still daylight and people recognize good from evil. So I pray, brothers and sisters, that you leave our study of chapter 13 convinced that the Lord wants you as much as possible to submit to the secular authorities and to do good to those around us. God bless you.